Hello, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 2 of the Oxford Wine and Spirits podcast. I'm coming to you today after a week of sheer drama in the UK spirits industry. We kicked off last week with Brewdog announcing the launch of a brand new tequila to join their portfolio, only for Edinburgh gin producers Linden Lime to accuse the beer company of stealing their bottle design. And while Brewdog were quick to defend their new tequila bottle, when you look at the two products side by side, you can't help but feel Linden Lime did have a point. But that was just a scuffle, and things were only just getting started, as we learned last Monday that Darius Plazowski, owner of Bimber Distillery, one of London's first single malt whiskey producers, had been arrested and charged with arms dealing and conspiracy to murder back in his native Poland as far back as 2003. It's been alleged that Darius, originally Lucas Ratajkowski, fled prosecution and started a new life for himself in the UK before going on to found Bimber Distillery in 2015. Fortunately, my guest on today's podcast has nothing like this kind of story to tell. Lewis Hayes is known in the industry as the owner of London's Black Parrot and Merchant House bars. In 2023, he launched DropWorks, Europe's largest rum distillery, based just outside of the city of Nottingham. We've been fortunate enough to have had the opportunity to track Lewis's journey in building and launching DropWorks through his very own YouTube channel, which I very much recommend checking out to any of you rum geeks out there. I sat down with Lewis back in September 2023 when DropWorks had been distilling for just about 3 months. The interview is basically structured in 2 parts, beginning with a discussion on the history and current state of the burgeoning UK rum scene. And later, in part 2 of the interview, we start talking about the setup at DropWorks Distillery, and I'll apologise in advance, it does get a bit geeky. But I do still think it's very much worth a listen. So, without further ado, here's my interview with Lewis Hayes of DropWorks Distillery. Lewis Hayes, welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Before we actually get started proper, I'd just like to ask about your last week, because you're the busiest man in show business, right?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm hard to pin down. I'm actually not doing anything. I'm just chilling in my own garden. Last week involved, I live in Nottingham and I have 2 very young little girls. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, which take up all of my spare time. So when I wasn't doing that or at the distillery, I had to make a trip down to London. I made a trip to Birmingham. I made a trip to Glasgow, and I made a trip to Edinburgh, and then back down to Nottingham. But that kind of sums up my life at the moment. So when I'm not at the distillery and I'm not being a dad, I'm on the road talking to people and trying to raise awareness for how awesome I think rum is.
Absolutely. I mean, I can certainly agree with that. So let's start out by doing a bit of background work, because it's often a very long and surprising journey for someone to get to a point where they actually own a distillery, let alone a rum distillery, let alone a rum distillery in Nottingham. I was hoping you could give us a little bit of a bio about yourself. Did I hear somewhere that you started your career as an actor?
You may have heard that. That is true. Yes, it's a crazy whirlwind story. In fact, I still feel like I'm acting. I'm just playing the role of a CEO to a rum distillery, and some venues down in London. So yeah, it still feels like I'm playing a role. But I guess lots of people in my position probably feel like that for a while. Yeah, I started out acting. I went to university in Manchester. That was my dad's way of saying good luck. With my accent and my floppy hair, he was like, good luck in Manchester, grow up. And I loved it. I just loved it enormously. And I bartended my way through uni to fund it, because although I sound like I've got lots and lots of money, I don't. And it was great great fun. The people I met, the friends I made, and it was hard to say goodbye to it. So I did a drama and film degree, got an agent off the back of it, was acting professionally for a while, including some fun little credits to my name like Emmerdale and stuff like that. So I won't say too much more about that. Don't Google me. Well, it's one of those ones now that if I make enough noise in the rum scene, you can Google me and it'd be okay, and you'll just find out about rum. Scroll a bit further down and you'll find all this weird stuff about how I was acting in this theatre here and there, or this advert for Motor Point cars and all of that. So I loved acting. I moved down to London after an extra year in Manchester, and I was acting down there for a bit, and then as most actors do, funding their way through it by doing jobs here and there, and I found myself just doing bar job after bar job. And where it's difficult for someone in the arts to hold down a permanent job because you might be gone to do an acting role, and then you want your job back, which is difficult for a venue. So it meant that I was hopping job to job, different venues all the time. And the best way to do that, or what played to my skill set at the time, was to do new openings. There's always a venue opening, and it was just incredible. I was getting phone calls being like, "Oh, Lewis, I've heard you're a good guy to get involved with an opening. Can you help us write a menu?" Just simple things like that. Can you help train the bar team? Can you help us curate a list of vodkas and whiskies and gins? Can you help us? So I'd do that, and then maybe I'd get an acting job, maybe I wouldn't, and then there'll be another new opening, so I can move on to that one and do that. And I think me and a chap called Nate Brown, who was my business partner for a long time, between us, we'd done over 30 venues before we launched our company. And basically, we launched a company called the London Bar Consultants to do it formally. Instead of just bar hopping, I decided that to put the acting on the back burner, and to focus on doing consultancy professionally for the drinks industry. I just felt like there was just so much opportunity, and I felt really passionate about trying to make a positive change to it. So yeah, we formed the London Bar Consultants in 2012, took on our first venue around that time, which was the City of London Distillery. At the time, we had the largest gin collection in the world, and there was a gin distillery there. Still is there. There is still a distillery there today. They make Whitley Neal down there now. So yeah, that sort of springboarded me into a consultancy that ended up taking me around the world. Did consultancy in India, and actually I should be more specific because India is enormous. I did a single project in Delhi, which was an unbelievable experience. I ended up going back out there like 3 or 4 times. They won Best Bar in India, and they were doing just so well. And then we did some work in Dubai, a couple of different projects there. Did a project in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and a handful of jobs across Europe. And then just, lots of interesting projects on the go, which involved not just venues, but sometimes products and helping products come to market. So that's what I've been doing up until COVID times, along with my 2 venues, Merchant House and Black Parrot, which are both bars in the City of London. And yes, COVID comes, and I finally found the courage, the nerve, the stupidity to go about launching my own distillery and put my money where my mouth was, so to speak.
Fantastic. And here we are today. So we met about a year ago at Pete Holland's Think Rum. At the time, my personal understanding of the British rum category was simply a case of you get these companies popping up, purchasing a bunch of casks filled with Caribbean rum from somewhere like EA Shear, slapping a label on it and calling it British rum. And it was something, as a spirits buyer, that I was getting a little bit sick and tired of hearing about. So imagine my surprise now that I know that that's not the case. And I was wondering if you could give me a brief history of rum in the UK, and then follow up by telling us a little bit about the current state of the industry today.
Yeah, happily. So there's some really simple facts that people can remember, or hopefully get their heads around, but it's bewildering facts. And that's why it's sort of a bit confusing. there were so obviously there is a richer history to British rum than just the 21st century. There was rum production that we know of in Britain in the 18th century, and possibly been happening around the scenes without HMRC knowing about it in other centuries as well. But I've always tried to focus on the future of rum. So I guess I'd rather not say something that I'm not 100% on, because there's so much misinformation out there. So one thing I would say is, if you want to know about the actual history of British rum, Anastasia Miller, I know that she did, a drinks journalist, historian. She did, I don't know if it was her master's or her thesis or what it was, or dissertation. I contacted her. She had done her, let's say, thesis on British rum and the history of rum production in Britain. So she'll be a fascinating person to talk to at some point. And we know it happened. We know it existed. Fast forward to 2015. At the start of that year, there were no British rum distilleries in the UK. And then you had Dr. J's open up, and that became the English Spirit Company, and they started off making whiskey and gin, and they have absinthe, and they have liqueurs, and they've got rum as well, and they contract out for various different people. I've done a video on it, on them in particular, because they're a fascinating setup. In fact, I find them, I know it sounds silly, but I find them hilarious, because I'm like, this is incredible, and I just find it really amusing that human willpower can achieve something so fascinating and extraordinary. He's clearly a mad scientist, and you go in and you see literally naked flames underneath a whole series of pot stills all along the floor, and he's distilling in all these different pots. I can't remember how many it is now. There's something like 12 pots on the floor, so that's 12 naked flames in different parts of the building. Absolute madness. And he was the first, and then the first in Scotland was Dark Matter. Although I haven't tasted any of their rum yet. They make a spiced rum which has been very well received and been going on for a while, but I haven't tasted any of their rum. The distinction being rum having no flavorings added is what I'm getting at there. So COVID's obviously been a big event in the world since 2015 and now, and over that time people were struggling with businesses, thinking outside the box. They had time to stop and rethink, similar to myself in that regard, actually. And I think at the time of Think Rum, which was less than a year ago, there were 30 distilleries in the UK. So start of 2015 there were none. There were then 30. I was having a conversation with Steve, the barman, the other day. He reckons that we could be up to 80. Which, by the way, that would take us to more distilleries in the UK than the entire Caribbean put together.
That's insane. I mean, that's on track for having more rum distilleries in the UK than Scotch whiskey distilleries in Scotland.
Is that right? How many roughly in Scotland?
I think there's about 150 in Scotland currently.
Wow.
So if you look at the rise we've got at the moment, that's going to eclipse that pretty soon.
Yeah, and I think there's probably one really simple reason as to why, which is barrier to entry. If you want to start a Scotch distillery, well, firstly, you've got to be in Scotland. Second of all, you have to have multiple copper stills. That's the rules. And who can afford multiple? I mean, I know plenty of distillers in the UK making rum with one single still, and it might be a small still. You also don't need to go through the process of using a mash tun to extract the sugars from within the grains. You've already got a ready source of sugars in molasses that can be imported and shipped around easily. So a far smaller barrier to entry. And a lot of, let's say, gin distillers that might want to try their hand at rum production, really all they need is a fermentation tank and something to mix it. And that could be like a hand whisk, like it really could. I know Richard at Retribution Rum, who I absolutely love, he literally buckets in the molasses with like an old ice cream tub. He scoops it from the big thing of molasses into the top of his hot water to mix it up. Hilarious.
I think it's a good time to pay homage to Rich from Retribution because it's such an impressive setup that he's got there.
Yeah.
You go round and you see the naked flames in the tiny barn, and you can get a little bit worried sometimes. You go, okay, and then he says to you, so I got a quote to buy a new still and it was far too expensive, so I decided to build my own. And then your eyes kind of get bigger and you look at it and it looks like a still, and there's fire and there's all sorts happening, and then you taste the liquid and it's absolutely beautiful.
His liquid is
incredible.
He's making great liquid.
So no, I'm absolutely with you. So that's a really interesting point, and I'm really interested to see the direction that UK rum goes in as well, because there's very much, looking at the market at the moment, there's very much kind of gin is on the way down, and then there's, I don't remember how many gin producers there are in the UK, but there's thousands. And it'd be interesting to see what a lot of these guys come up with, because a lot of them are turning to rum, which by all measures is on the way up. So it's going to be an interesting thing.
It's fascinating hearing you say that rum is on the up, because there's have you read the Campari report that was done in 2022?
No, I don't think I have.
It's worth having a little peek at. I'll forward it to you after this, and anyone out there that's interested in it, it's readily available. So Campari,
we'll put some links to it down below.
Yeah, good shout. So they in there it talks about the state of rum globally, focusing on the UK in particular. It's the report that highlighted that rum has now overtaken Scotch whisky in sales in the UK. It's worth over £1 billion in the UK now, and it talks about why and what's working. And essentially, they're saying two things: younger people are drinking rum as a drink of choice. 49% of rum sales in the UK are between 18 and 34-year-olds, and rum is premiumizing, so that people are spending more on a bottle of rum than they've ever done before. So spiced rum's booming, young people are drinking rum, and rum is also premiumizing. And those are basically the key findings.
So we've got this rise. What do you think the biggest challenges are that the UK rum industry are facing right now? And how do you think we're going to overcome them?
Often when I try and answer a question like this, I think what's the reverse of it? Like, what's its biggest asset? And I think because I think its biggest asset is also its biggest weakness at this moment in time, which for me is the fact that there aren't rules. There's no rules for the category, so people can do whatever they want. And there's also very little regulation of rules. So there are some rules. I don't mean to be flippant and say there are no rules. You can't just label water rum, right? There are rules. For example, you can add no more than 40 grams of sugar per litre and call it rum. If it's more, you can't call it rum. You can't flavour it. It has to be made from sugarcane molasses or sugarcane syrup or sugarcane juice. And there are one or two other things, right? But there's nothing stopping somebody aging it in a chestnut barrel. There's nothing stopping somebody using an untrialed open-top fermentation with a wild yeast in it, or somebody inoculating it with a certain bacteria, or chucking in vinegars. Or there's all sorts of stuff you can do, which means the diversity of the category is enormous. And it also means that the range of quality is pretty broad. And then if you understand that there's very little regulation, so there's no one checking up on what people are doing, not really. In fact, I know of a story, I won't mention names, but I know of a story whereby somebody tried to question with trading standards someone that they knew was breaking the rules. And the trading standards person turned around and said, "Is it really my job to deal with this? We haven't had to deal with this sort of thing in the UK before." And the guy went, "Yes, it is your job." And he went, "Oh, I think it's food standards." So anyway, between the two parties, food standards and trading standards, they investigated it and went, well, basically, because everyone's breaking the rules, there's kind of like a precedent already set. So it's hard for us to actually enforce coming down on someone because everyone's doing it. I was like, oh, so if everyone just starts going around killing each other, that's fine, apparently. But if one person does it, that's an issue. So there is supposed to be regulation, but even the people who are supposed to be doing it, they're not doing it. Useless bunch. So I think that has led to an enormous problem, which ties in with the strength of the category about its diversity. But it means that people are getting up to all sorts of nonsense. And I think the biggest risk there is that consumers, and I put myself in that category as a consumer, it's not just trade and off trade. I mean, everyone that's consuming it, we have no idea what means what anymore, if that's the case. So the whole point of putting a word on the front of a bottle is to help consumers discern whether they want to taste something that tastes of juniper, or they want to taste something that's been derived from a grain, or like a malted barley, or they want to taste something from sugarcane. So if it doesn't help them, then they're going to be lost, and then rum is devalued. So I think regulation is important, but the freedom of movement within that category, I think, is the biggest strength at the same time. So I don't know if I've answered the question though.
It's really fun. I think you have, kind of. But no, you're absolutely right. And do you know what I absolutely love about that answer as well is it reminds me of when I was reading all of these books about rum in the 17th century, where people across the Caribbean, North America, South America are making rum, but with absolutely no checks and balances. So you have rum leaving Barbados that had to be pretty sturdy because they knew it was going to get watered down. They knew it was going to get flavored. They knew X, Y, and Z was going to happen to it. And so the pure sort of spirit as it began with had to be something. Yeah. And, that's what it would be. You get to the point where the United States of America is becoming a country, and rum is playing a huge role in terms of trade and economics. At the same time, you've just got people distilling stuff, and as consumers, we're kind of hoping for the best, really. So it's kind of cool. Frontier territory. I like it. And,
it is. And we're sort of and at the same time now, because I think that's such a good point you raised there, because sometimes we can fall too much in the camp of like, no, we need regulation and we need rules and we need to tell people how they can't do things. And that's the Scotch Whisky Association, full stop. Like, everyone knows that. They've done a brilliant, brilliant job. That it's so important, that it's so good that they exist, because they have protected what they had, but they've also hindered growth and movement in the category. And New World whiskies can be so exciting, where Scotch can't play around in that territory. And I think the same thing with rum. It's like we shouldn't be complaining too much about the state of affairs. This is an opportunity to let consumers judge with their palates, judge with their eyes on a brand and the liquid inside, and they'll vote with their wallets. I mean, that's why I'm not too fussed about that whole thing. I used to get very het up about it, like standing on the bar and like people would say, "Oh, have you tried this rum?" I'm like, you think it's good because it's just got a load of sugar, glycerol flavorings and color in it. But if it was labeled a vanilla liqueur, would you have bought it and drunk it? Would you really? And that always used to wind me up. Whereas now I'm just like, just make delicious liquid and let everyone else decide. So that's what we focus on now. It's kind of like we just get on with trying to make the best quality liquid we can and let everyone else fight it out.
Let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I think you will get to a situation where the cream's going to rise to the top. I think consumers are a lot more savvy these days. And I think, gone are the days where people think a good rum is a good rum because that brand of rum had the most money for marketing. Yeah. I think people are, certainly as someone that spends several days a week working in a shop, people are more discerning. People are more open to trying different things, and people are willing to take risks, and they want to hear the stories. And if they're down with the story of what that producer is trying to do, then they'll give that rum a shot, and then they'll come back and support it. So hopefully that's what's going to continue to happen, and what's going to drive the progress of the UK rum industry.
I love that.
I love this conversation as well, because it brings me on to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is GIs, geographical indications. I mean, it's such a hot topic in the rum world. You only have to go onto the Ministry of Rum and see people bitching about it left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
Probably my least favourite thing about the rum category is the tribalism of taking sides and on this kind of matter. But I do think it's important to have an open conversation about GIs, as we've kind of started doing already. I mean, we've seen in the UK recently, the English Whisky Guild have applied for a GI for English whiskey. It was only announced in the last month, 6 weeks, that Wales now has a GI for Welsh whiskey. And I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts as well. Do you see in your mind that's happening with British rum? Can you perceive a GI for British rum appearing at any point in the future?
It's a really good question. I think obviously it's hard to see past what's going on in Barbados at the moment, and I think one thing I would say is, if you can't get 4 people to agree, how are we going to get 104 people to agree? That would be the first thing. So for those that don't know, there is a real impasse and a battle between the distillers in Barbados as to the rules they would like to enforce within their GI, and it's meant that they can't get a GI until they can agree. So there is currently no GI. Whereas I think in Britain there's something that has to be answered first. What is British rum? And I am not the person to answer it. It's beyond me. As in, like, it's not beyond my mental capacity, or maybe it is, but I'm not arrogant enough to assume that I'm some sort of authority and that it's my decision. It's not my decision. It's for other people to come together and agree or disagree. And my stance on it is there has to be a distinction between rum that is made in Britain from scratch, as in fermenting raw materials in the UK within the regulations, and people that bring in rum from outside of Britain and then do something to it in the UK, even if they redistill it or rectify it or do something with it in the UK, age it in the UK, Britain. I think there has to be a distinction there. And equally, like, I think at first I was like, it upsets me a bit when I'm making British rum and I'm at a show and someone goes, oh, I love this British rum made over here. And I'm like, yeah, that's Jamaican rum. It just so happens to be that they added some spices in the UK. So it's not even a rum anymore, but they're selling it as a British rum. And I find that frustrating, but it's easy to get bogged down in that sort of stuff. And actually, just for me, it's like, no, I think I need to fly the flag high enough and loudly enough for what I believe to be quality British rum without having to criticize what other people are doing. But I think that's easy for me to say. We've got to work together. And I think the biggest risk to a GI is that there's infighting between people saying, well, I want to do it this way and you want to do it that way. And probably what's the best thing, as I mentioned 10 minutes ago, probably the best thing at the moment is there is a distinct lack of instruction on how people have to do this, which means there's great experimentation going on. Take the guys at Outlier Distillery on the Isle of Man. What they do there is mental. They are insane, and I highly recommend that that people go out and try their insane liquid. It's rum, but they're making it in a totally different way to I am. But I love it. I absolutely love what they're doing. They're playing for example, they're playing around with casking stuff and then redistilling it, and sometimes even making like a fruit punch with their rum and then redistilling the fruit punch. It's just insane. And so to some people, they're like, that's not rum. You can't call that rum. And maybe there are black and white rules that say they can or can't. And I'm like, genuinely no comment. I love what they're doing, and I love that it exists. One other thing I'd add to this is that I think the Scottish guys feel proudly Scottish, whereas I feel proudly British. I don't feel proudly English. I feel proudly British. And I like the transient nature of being able to be part of something bigger. I think I would love a broader GI if it's going to happen for a wider area. And I think that other people might vote for a Scottish GI or something like that over a British GI. If it is going to happen, it will be after there's a big boom in the UK, a load of people start doing it, a handful of people fall off, and then it will be the people that remain coming together saying, right, guys, we don't feel threatened by each other anymore. We've gone through this together. Let's now come together and form something whereby we can put this thing on our bottle that says it was made here and it's quality.
It was wonderful to go to the rum show from the Whiskey Exchange and stand in a room filled with British rum producers and get a sense of the community that exists between you guys. It was really, really cool. Everyone's pushing each other's products. Everyone's supporting the heck out of each other. I think it's a fantastic thing. So, never say never.
I mean, I have a huge love for what the other guys are doing. Like, I wouldn't do what I'm doing were it not for other people already existing first. Like, and they've already trod ground that I'm not having to tread as a new person now. It's like I couldn't do DropWorks without them. And like a good example of that would be Isla Rum Company. And what Ben is doing on Isla with the double retort, phenomenal liquid he's making. Not much of it available yet, but don't mistake that for the fact that he is making loads of it and he's laying it down. It's going to be unbelievable. Kit Carruthers at Ninefold, another great example. I have travelled the rum world enormously. I've tasted thousands of rums, and I all too often, this is a bit of a secret, by the way, not many people know this about me. I all too often find rum interesting. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I don't often find rum delicious. And there are rums out there I think are delicious. But Kit at the rum show had a bottle on his stand, and I'm like, this is 3-year-old liquid. You have made an utterly delicious rum. Other people are presenting 15-year-olds, 21-year-olds, age statements galore. He's done in 3 years what other people still aren't doing. And I think that's fascinating. I think it's testament to the resilience of the small producers in the UK at the moment. Like,
Kit stuff's just fantastic, and I'm 100% with you on that. When I've tasted some of his experimental cask ranges, some of the special bottlings, they really are sort of wow moments, and they really come up there with rums that you remember and that you want to revisit and go back to and taste again. And
100%.
And it's insane that he's doing it, in such a small space. He's doing it pretty much by himself, and he's doing it as such a labor of love as well with his one still again. So it's extremely impressive. So moving on, what can you see happen? I mean, I'm asking you to tell me the future now. Let's say in an ideal world, dream scenario, how does UK rum progress in the next 5 to 10 years?
Really good question, Tom. Thank you. I think spiced rum is going to boom, and it kind of already is. And I think in the same way that you might want to draw a distinction between gin and like pink gin, there's something happening within the rum world now, or the spiced rum world, whereby for some reason spiced rum and rum get bracketed together, and I do find that odd, because you wouldn't bracket vodka and gin together. You wouldn't go, oh, vodka's booming in the UK because everyone's drinking gin. And I think spiced rum is going to reveal some interesting winners and I say winners in the sense that brands that will make it, brands that will find a home with the public and people that just really enjoy that liquid. I think there is definitely space for real rum, unadulterated, not flavoured, to go through something similar. Whether that happens in the next 10 years or not, I don't know. My ambition, and hence the scale of DropWorks, is that we are laying down an enormous amount of barrels, because I do believe that there is space for multiple British rums to be hugely successful across Britain and further afield. Like, I've gone and got trademarks in mainland Europe, in Australia, in the US, in Canada, because that's where I'm plotting. That's where I'm going forwards and saying, I'm going here next, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. We have to get feedback, we have to listen to the public, but at the same time, I don't think it's arrogant to say that I know my rum and I know what we're producing is exceptional quality and that there's a place for it in the market. What we're producing is unaged liquid. What that's going to come out of the barrels like in months, in years, is going to be. I'm so excited, genuinely, and I think that liquid, the aged liquid, is gonna be a real contender for the global scene.
Going back to the spice rum, I think there's a really interesting trend at the moment where we're starting to see some quite grown up spiced rums, which don't have 50 grams per litre of sugar in, which aren't focused primarily on vanilla. It's really interesting to see. I mean, going back to Kit again, his spiced rum, you feel, I don't think there is anise in it, but I think there's definitely you can taste anise in there, and it's something that's different and interesting, particularly for a rum fan to taste and go, oh, actually, yeah, this isn't just a sugary mess. This is great stuff. So that's something I'm quite keen to see develop. And as I was saying earlier, people are so much more receptive as well. I think there's a stock answer anytime anyone wants to dismiss English rum by saying, well, you can't grow sugarcane here, by turning around and saying, well, they don't do much in Barbados or Jamaica either, to be fair.
Yeah.
And I think the passion coming from people such as yourselves, from Kit, from the Outlier Boys, Rich, is really driving things forward. And also the passion from the rum fans in the UK who are taking this stuff seriously. And sooner or later, I do believe that is going to translate into a wider market. So I mean, I think the future's bright. And then going back again to the stories, there's some wonderful stories coming out. And as a consumer, I think it's the stories that lead to the sales, because it's being able to communicate that, and it's being able to have something that transcends what's in the glass, something that they can pour for their friends and then retell that story, and then their friends get it, and then it's, it snowballs from there. So before we move on and talk about DropWorks, we've mentioned a few producers already, but is there anyone that we haven't mentioned so far that you feel needs a shout out?
Definitely, absolutely. Matuga Rum, Paul and Jason, I love what they're doing. They've been really making waves in Scotland and bringing a lot of people to the category. They've done great work, and they make great liquid as well. Guys down at Circumstantial Distillery down in Bristol, they're making a whole range of stuff, but again, doing things their way, and I love it. I love what they're doing. Great tasting liquid, and their whole range is really cool, not just their rums. They've got wheat and corn, and they're basically experimenting. They did a rice one that was just insanely delicious and cool. Doug at Scratch, he's been going for a while. I believe he had some sort of success with Berry Brothers and Rudd, and he'll be expanding and producing lots of delicious liquid with them. Who else might I forget? There's probably loads of people I'm forgetting. Sorry, guys.
It's all good. So let's talk about DropWorks. We're having this conversation at the beginning of September in 2023. At this point, how long have you been distilling rum for?
3 months.
And how did all of this come about at the beginning?
During COVID, I was so tired one night, and I'd had my first child born, and we're not getting any sleep, and my bars have been shut down by viruses and governments, and I'm struggling to keep my team employed and on furlough, and I basically had like a moment of realization that was like, do you know what, I'm fed up being kicked about by the world and the situation. I was like, I care far too much about this whole scene and I thought, do you know what, we can just lie down and let it all happen, or we can actually stand up and fight. And I thought, this is my way of fighting. I can't go out and get a load of money to open up a whole big bar chain, but I thought I can make a positive influence by producing quality liquid that's unadulterated. And I know enough about rum production and care enough about it that that should be the way that I go about doing it. It's about trying to see a positive change in the drinks industry and expand from there. Like it was like someone had caged a tiger. I was like, let me out, because when I'm out, I'm getting out there. So I feel very passionately about making this positive change. So that's what DropWorks is about. That was the dream early on, and I spoke with a few people about it, and they were like, go for it. Don't worry about the money, just dream big. And I'm very lucky that I managed to find some really wonderful investors that believe in what I'm trying to do. So this came from no money. Like, we had to raise money, but it came from the seed of an idea to make a positive change, and I'm being backed to do it, basically. DropWorks is about doing individual limited releases. We're going to work with artists in the local areas where we're doing those drops to design labels. We're going to work with a local musician for the launch, and we're going to employ people as we go, giving back to the arts and society, rather than just say, hey, we're giving 5% of our profits to charity. No, we're going to spend it as we go, and we're going to spend it in different areas across the UK, and in areas that I think are really in need of supporting, like the arts, for example.
It's really fantastic, and it's an exciting thing to hear about. And I think it's kind of cool as well, because it's sort of 2 steps away from the traditional idea and concept of rum. I like the idea of rum doing different things. So it's cool to kind of associate rum with something new and exciting and different. So that's great. And I wanted to ask about the bottles as well, because to that end, the bottles are like no other rum bottle I've ever seen before. Could you give me a bit of insight into what's going on there?
Yeah, happily. It's really important to me that we as a company look forwards rather than backwards. Now, on the one hand, you could say, well, we wouldn't be calling it rum if we weren't referencing something that's already come before. And our stills, they're not exactly the most inventive of stills. So, like, we have a pot still, we have a double retort, and we have an 8-plate hybrid with a column. There's a lot of tradition that's gone into how and why we've set things up the way we have, but the way we behave with that equipment, and the way we behave as a company, with our branding and with the way we communicate with us internally and externally with people, is to focus on moving forwards. So I've always said that for me, the biggest problem with rum is the lack of information and transparency for consumers and bartenders to understand exactly what it is. And what is rum? If I ask Joe Public what they think rum is, they're going to say, oh, it's something to do with sugar, cocktails. They might say dark and stormy. They might say rum and coke. They might say mojito or Mai Tai, pina colada, coconut on a beach. And the problem with rum for consumers is that they get mismarketed. They're told it's about pirates and sea monsters and parrots and stuff like that. And it's not. It's really not. It's a series of production processes. It's a raw material that was fermented, distilled, and or barrel aged. That's rum. In my eyes, you have 5 products, and that's what we have in our core range. We've only got 4 at the moment because we're waiting for our barrel aged. So we have Dark Drop, which has been released in October. That is a product that celebrates the raw material. The flavors within it come from the raw material. So on the bottle, you have bits of sugarcane, cuts of sugarcane on the bottle. You have molasses swirling around on the outside, a visual representation of molasses on the outside. You have a panna on the front, it looks a bit like a cement mixer, but it's basically what takes your sugarcane juice and turns it into molasses by extracting the sugars, heating it up. So we have the very machine that is responsible for making molasses as the central image on the front of our bottle for Dark Drop. So this product is about the raw material. Second product we have is called Funk Drop. Funk is a reference, of course, to the high ester, extremely aromatic rums that you predominantly see in Jamaica. But Funk Drop for us is about developing flavor through fermentation and through the yeast imparting all sorts of interesting precursors for esters during the fermentation process. So we have a fermenter on the front of that bottle, and we have CO2 bubbles dotted around, and we even have some yeast cells dotted around as well for you. So this is unashamedly a product that we are saying it's all about fermentation. And then we have Clear Drop, which celebrates distillation. And in particular, this one, it's about celebrating the clean, rich but clean, so oily, or picture oily, flavors that you can generate through slow, careful distillation by making very narrow cuts and distilling it very slowly using our deflagmator to slow it all down through our column. So we've got a picture of our still on the front of the bottle. And then we have, so as I said, we're then waiting on our barrel aged product, which will be Barrel Drop in the future. And then we have Spice Drop, which is a product that celebrates spice flavors within rum. So without talking about the liquid on that, because we could talk for hours about what we've done there, I think the best way to now go full circle on the packaging is to talk about the color, because it's probably the most immediate thing that you would pick up on about the bottles. They're full of vibrant colors, because I think of color as a really important and interesting way of describing flavor. So I use the colors to represent the types of flavors I think that people will taste in the liquid. And Spice Drop has like all the colors of the rainbow, just like it's been paintballed, like splattered all over it. Because if I was to buy in neutral flavored rum and I flavor that with, let's say, cinnamon and passion fruit, my product is only ever going to taste of cinnamon and passion fruit, because you started with a blank canvas. Whereas with our product, we develop flavors at each of the stage of the production process. So through fermentation, distillation, and even the raw materials, the flavors are carrying through. So, and then even with a bit of wood chips afterwards as well. So there's all sorts of flavors being added to it, which means that by the time you taste it, there's a complexity there. So if I'm describing flavor in color, then you need every color you can get, because you're saying, no, this isn't two-dimensional. This doesn't just taste of passion fruit and cinnamon. We all know this, but like if someone picks up a glass of wine, they're rarely thinking, why am I smelling passion fruit or elderflower or lemon zest? And you don't really go through the thought process of thinking, well, hold on, this is just grape juice. Why am I smelling all these wonderful things? And it's really simple. It's because of esterification. It's esters, it's acids and alcohols coming together to create esters that we see as flavor. And lo and behold, we end up smelling and tasting delicious things. The same thing has happened in our spiced rum. So when someone smells it, we haven't added coconut, but you might smell coconut. And similarly, someone might smell blackcurrant because there's an ester in there that makes you think of blackcurrant. So color is really important, and that's why Spice Drop is littered with color. Going back through the rest of that range, the colors that we've used on those bottles are exactly for the same reason, because they're representative of flavor. And similarly with Funk Drop, just lastly to say, that's the one about fermentation. Because the flavors are developed through a longer fermentation process with our wild yeast, it means that the flavors in there are also really broad and complex. So each of those CO2 bubbles that we've got bubbling off, we've put a full rainbow in each one of them, so that you get the idea again, sort of referencing back to Spice Drop, that there's a complexity to it. You shouldn't have asked, should you?
No. I love to hear it. I've been lucky enough to taste through a fair bit of what you've produced so far. And I've got to say, the Funk Drop is a revelation, particularly for UK rum. I think it's absolutely fantastic. Okay. But I must say that the Clear Drop, I think, is low key becoming my favourite one.
Really?
I don't know. There's just a subtlety to it. When you've got the two bottles in front of you, I think the Clear Drop's the one that I might go back to just for a nice, easy sit down. Let's make a nice, simple cocktail and go for it. Whereas the Funk Drop is just a big kind of slap in the face of deliciousness. And I think you need to put a seatbelt on before you actually drink it.
I wasn't going to release it, but we were giving out tasters to people, and they're just like, please, can I buy this? I'm like, no, it's not available. And I just thought, hold on, why am I not releasing it? And the reason was because I wanted to develop. I wanted more. We've only been distilling for 3 months today. Like, we haven't had time to really explore and develop, really think we can. But the feedback on Funk Drop was just so positive. I just thought, okay, this isn't about me and my ego and us blending something that I think is really complex and interesting. We're going to do that in the future. We're going to release Super Funk, which will be like a massively high ester, us playing around with what we think we can achieve. And we're still doing those experiments in-house now. So we've got some fun, really high ester ones. The Funk Drop actually for me is really low. It's actually a relatively low ester count. It's relatively, I think it's elegant. I think that's why it's appealed to people because, yeah, well, they've tasted the big, funky Jamaican rums before. This is an opportunity to taste something that's like, almost like the little sister of the big Jamaican rums. And it's gone down so well. I've been really pleased. But Clear Drop is the one that I'm sipping neat on ice at the moment. I'm like, but how do I drink it? Because I just want to drink it neat on ice. Even at 45% with a bit of extra ABV on it, it still just sips just neat. It's crazy. Thank you for your kind words there, Tom. I appreciate it.
No problem. I mean, it is really interesting that hearing you say you weren't going to release it because, I mean, looking from what I've seen of your setup, I mean, you've got all the tools you need to create some pretty funky stuff. To be fair, I mean, you've got the double retorts. Did I hear you've got a muck pit on site? Is that a thing?
Yeah, pit's probably the wrong word, but like we have a tank that's we've got a 5,000 litre tank that we're dedicating to muck, and that's been going so well that actually I've had to leave the distillery at times because it's so bloody smelly. It's one of those ones that it's not sexy marketing, is it? Oh yeah, mold and bacteria and pellicles and like, but actually it's responsible for so much flavor development. And like, yeah, we take our dunder, we've got aged dunder, we're creating muck, and we even create vinegars on site as well. Vinegars are a really essential ingredient to amplifying the esters and going big on it. And that's what we've been doing with Super Funk. But yeah, we've got a big tank dedicated to muck at the moment.
Just for those listening who might not know, if we're going back to the muck tank, what is it exactly?
So dunder, it comes from the word redundant, and that's the non-alcoholic liquid left in your pot after you've taken all the alcohol out. So you've distilled and you end up with this hot dunder in your pot still. So you then remove that dunder, and you can do a number of different things with this. That's actually still got a lot of sugars in that the yeast itself can't consume. But there are sugars left in there that the yeast can't eat, that bacteria can eat. It also, because of the dead yeast that was inside there, depending on how much yeast actually carries through from your fermentation, you end up with dead yeast cells in the pot, which can act as a good nutrient for the next fermentation. So you can use dunder in a number of different ways. But one of the predominant ways we're using it, and this is for different marks, so in particular if we want to create a high ester, a full flavoured aromatic rum, we take the dunder and we age it. And it's not just the watery, dark liquid that we are aging. It's in particular a bit of dunder and I'm trying to think what they call it in other industries, but I know that the brandy guys use it a lot when they talk about aging on the lees and stuff like that. But if we empty our fermentation tank, that's now, let's call it 10% alcohol, and you put that in your still and you distill it, it's not as straightforward as you take out your liquid and you put it through the still. At the bottom of your fermentation tank, the majority of the yeast will settle at the bottom and create like a bit of a sludge. That yeasty sludge, with sort of sleepy, dormant yeast, if you take that sludge and add it into your dunder, your cold dunder, and that's what you then leave to age, and each time you do a fermentation, you add more of that yeast sludge into it, you end up with the most deliciously foul-smelling product that cultivates all different sorts of bacteria. And the reason bacteria is important is because it leads to a diverse range of acids being created. If you create a single acid then that acid will bind with alcohol to create a specific flavor profile. And it will be two-dimensional, as in you'll smell lemon or you'll smell pineapple, depending on which ester it is that you formed. Whereas if you create a diverse range of acids, you're creating precursors to a diverse range of esters. And that's why it's really important to create if you want to supercharge the esters.
And I really want to go more into it, but I think we might start losing people. I mean, I've been told to shut up on this subject so many times.
One of the reasons there, Tom, is because people sometimes find it hard to follow. And I don't mean that in a patronising way, but it's a bit abstract. It's like, so which bit did you mean again? Which bit was that was in the pot? Which pot? The tank pot or the still pot? Or which, there's actually little bits of confusing things in there that can lead people to fall off on the explanation. And the other reason is because different people describe it in different ways. So you think you've understood it, and then you talk to someone from a different distillery, and they describe it in a different way. And like, I have no idea. Anyway, muck, dunder, all boring. It creates flavour.
Oh man. So I've also heard some pretty wicked stories about your cask program. Do you think you could tell us a little bit about the barrels and maybe a couple of spoilers about what we might be seeing in the future?
Yeah, happily. I always draw a line in the sand about quality, and I like to produce and I like to taste and recommend to other people behind the bar high quality products. So it doesn't matter what flavors there are, that's totally subjective, but quality for me is objective. You can say this is a higher quality distillate than the other one. Flavor, totally subjective. So when creating DropWorks, it's like, right, line in the sand, we have to make the highest quality liquid we can. But flavor, who are we to say that this is the best flavor or that's the best flavor? So we've got a core range that explore the different steps of production. And they also fit neatly within certain categories, of course, like a dark rum or a spiced rum or a funky overproof, So we have those core range, but then everything else we're doing is going to be dropped. A limited release of unique flavors developed by specific casks. And I'm trying to project what I think will be interesting and exciting flavors by pairing different marks that we make. And when I say a different mark, for those that don't know, we refer to the word mark as a specific style of rum. So a high ester rum made on our double retort with our sugarcane honey as opposed to our molasses might be a mark. Whereas something that's gone through our column that was made with molasses and a wild yeast strain, that'll be a different mark. So I'm picking marks that I think will suit specific casks. As I said, we've been distilling for 3 months. So there's not a huge amount of, but we have about 60 barrels laid down so far. A portion of those are going to go to be blended to be a permanent barrel release. And that is about celebrating the flavors that come from the casks in marriage and relationship with the distillate that we're doing. So we have, basically that's going to be a blend. This is a spoiler, but I don't mind. Effectively, we are going to be blending bourbon casks, ex-bourbon casks, with STRs that have American oak and Portuguese oak in them. So that's a bit of a barrel aging setup that we have on one side of our distillery. And on the other side, we've got all of our single cask releases that we're going to be dropping. So almost no two barrels are the same. And over there, we have got Oloroso sherry casks. We've got cognac casks, Bordeaux, red wine casks. We've got Sauternes, Muscatels, Hungarian oak, Portuguese oak, French oak, American oak. We've got virgin casks, smoked cask, char level 2, 3, 4 for French and American STRs. The bourbon casks are from 6 different bourbon distilleries, so it's not even just from one straightforward one. And then we've got a very special cask laying down, which I'm very pleased about, actually, hence I'll mention it, which is we've got a quarter cask from Port Ellen, which, for those that don't know, was an Islay whiskey distillery that got closed down in the 90s. So we have a PT cask laying down, filled with our rum, and I'm already dipping into these casks because the liquid that is coming out already is mind-blowing. What I mean to say is I'm surprised. I'm surprised at how quickly they are maturing. And age statements, I think I am learning, are even more of a myth than I even first thought. Now, we have to be patient and we have to allow time to do its thing. But I'm already tasting liquid in certain casks that I think we could release as 6-week-old rum. And you wouldn't believe it. You just wouldn't believe it. And I think why it's happening is because the types of casks we're using, STR casks, shaved, toasted, recharred, they're a bit of a novelty for the spirits industry. The English whiskey guys have been playing around with them quite a bit. And my head distiller, he was distilling over at the Cotswolds Distillery and the White Peak Distillery, 2 English whiskey distilleries. And so he's got some understanding of those STRs. He invented or came up with a new STR with Portuguese oak heads, American oak body, Portuguese heads. Never been done before. So our first ever barrel was like an invented barrel, which is fun. But the flavors that are coming out of these STRs are unbelievable. And because the distillate that we're putting into them, the rum that's going in, is so soft already, it doesn't need time to oxidize and to mellow and to have volatiles within it removed into the wood. The quality of the rum's already sipping. So it's actually about just adding some of the wood flavour to it. And I know there's all sorts of other things that happen in there. But that's why I think we're already able to release something like a 6-week-old liquid. And at some point next year, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to recreate some of these and we're going to release them as like a handful of weeks, maybe a month, couple of months old liquid. Because if you think about it, we are looking forwards. And if you think about tequila, how old is a reposado? A whole category of tequila that's delicious is we aged it for a couple of months. And Yecho is when you start to talk years. It's like it works for tequila because what it allows tequila to do is to be spirit forward. So it's like, yeah, taste our rum, and here's how it works with a bit of oak influence or a bit of wood influence.
Stepping away from rum, but I get on my soapbox, particularly with whiskey. It does my nut in when somebody tastes a young whiskey and go, oh yeah, it needs time, or oh yeah, it's young. I'm just like, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If it's good liquid coming out of the still, obviously, you know, for a Scotch whiskey, you need 3 years and a day, whatever. But I've tasted whiskies which are 3 years and a day, and the complexity, the downright deliciousness of them is right up there with some of the best stuff. Yeah. And I'm hoping it's going to get to the stage where it might even shine a light on some of these super old age statements and go, actually, do you know what? It's not about leaving something in a barrel so long you can iron out all of the flaws in the original distillate. It's about creating something that's fantastic to begin with and then seeing what you can add to it.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting talking to the guys from Nika in Japan, and you know, whether or not it's marketing or whatever, but the reason they gave for taking away age statements on their bottle, they thought it took away the chance to actually create something better than the sum of its parts in their whiskey. So they'll release a whiskey that has 7-year-old liquid in it, and in that blend will be some 40-year-old. And the way they described it was like a canvas painting. And if you've got your palette there, and if you suddenly slap an age statement on that palette, you're immediately taking out some of the colors that you can use to paint that picture. It's the way I look at it, and I can vouch for it by the fact that I've tasted these younger whiskies, and they're absolutely world class. So I urge other people to experiment.
And Tom, and so I just wanted to say one more thing about this, which is that if you're Scotch and you have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions of barrels laying down in your warehouse, you don't need to release young high quality distillates because you're actually selling from the old stock. But what you do need is the value of that stock to be as high as possible. So you demand that the price is higher So as your whole business, your whole model is lifted up because you've got valuable liquid laying down. And that's how they built with distilleries like this. The English whiskey guys that I give huge credit to, they didn't have tens of thousands of barrels laying down. They had to release young, relatively young liquid. Whiskey, minimum of 3 years old, but they had to get it out the doors at 3 years old. So they had to produce high quality distillates that didn't need 10, 15, 20 years to age in a cask. And they have shown us the way. And that is exactly what we are experiencing at our distillery. Like, you produce high quality distillate, you don't need the age statements. And as you said, you're drinking Clear Drop. Like, it's unaged. I don't know how you're drinking it, but we can drink it neat or just sipping on the rocks or something. It's crazy.
Well, I actually think that's a really good place to finish on. So if I may do one more shameless promotion, I mean, somebody's interested in some of the DropWorks rums, how can they get their hands on a bottle?
If they want to try DropWorks range through our website, or they can get it through you guys. But what I really want to see is it get onto as many bars as possible, so that instead of having to purchase a whole bottle and that feel like a risk, you can just taste a little bit, see that it's the real deal, and then you'll buy a bottle, right? So if people want tasters, or if they want to come to the distillery, you're very welcome. Come to the distillery, come and see how it works. I mean, we're Europe's largest rum distillery, so the opportunity to come and see that without having to fly all the way to the Caribbean is quite something. And yeah, we're pretty pleased with the setup in terms of the way we can help people discover rum. And we've even got a bar there, which has got, well, currently it's got about 100 plus. Well, it's got over 100 rums on it. Other people's rums. Come and try ours next to those other rums and see how it compares and stuff like that.
Lewis, thank you so much for your time. It's been a really great conversation, actually. It's been super duper fun. And yeah, I'm going to have to make my way up to the distillery as soon as possible myself.
See you soon. We'll open some barrels.
Well overdue.
So yeah, we'll have some fun. Tom, thank you for your time as well. Appreciate it.
Thank you to Lewis Hayes for your time and insights. I really did enjoy that conversation. If you enjoyed it too, please do drop us a like, subscribe, and even more importantly, recommend it to someone who you think might enjoy it too. I've been Tom Brady, and this has been the Oxford Wine and Spirits Podcast.